Look closely at a machine like this one. For almost all of human history, making cloth was slow, patient work, done by hand at a wheel or a hand loom. Then, within a single lifetime, came machines that could do the work of 40 spinners at once. In the year 1807, a machine like this was among the most valuable secrets in the world, and it belonged, almost entirely, to Britain. Almost everything in American war came off a British loom. The raw cotton was grown in the American South, shipped across the ocean, spun and woven in the mills of England, and sold straight back to America at a British price. A young country that had won its political freedom just a generation before was still, in the most basic way, dressed by the empire it had defeated. And Britain meant to keep it exactly that way. The policy was deliberate. Let the Americans grow the cotton. Let Britain spin it and weave it. Sending the machines out of the country was forbidden. Sending the drawings of them was forbidden. Even the skilled mechanics who knew how to build them were barred from leaving. Keep the Americans as farmers. Keep them as customers. But one man had already carried the secret across the ocean, not on paper, where it could be searched for and seized, but locked inside his own head. His name was Samuel Slater. As a boy, he had been apprenticed in an English mill, and over 7 long years he learned every wheel, every gear, every spindle of Britain's most advanced spinning machines. When he heard that America was offering rewards for exactly this knowledge, he made his choice. He could not carry a single drawing, so he memorized it all. He disguised himself as a farmhand, told the ship's officers nothing of his trade, and sailed for New York. Everything he knew, he carried in his memory alone. In Rhode Island, backed by a Quaker merchant named Moses Brown, he began to rebuild the machines from memory, part by part, until at last they turned. On the 20th of December, 1790, water from a river drove his spindles, and they spun the first cotton thread ever made by machine on American soil. 72 spindles. A whole industry standing in a single room. Years later, a president would call Samuel Slater the father of the American factory, but in that moment it was only a beginning. A single small mill on a single small river. One mill was not a country. Cloth still meant British cloth. American thread was a curiosity beside it. For the young republic to stand on its own, something would have to force the whole country to build, all at once, everywhere. And that force, when it came, would arrive in the shape of a disaster. For years, Britain had treated the American coast as if it were still her own. Her warships stopped American vessels on the open sea and dragged sailors off their decks by the thousands, claiming them as British subjects. This document is one man's protection paper. Proof, he hoped, that he was an American citizen and could not be taken. For thousands of others, it made no difference at all. Insult piled on insult, until the young nation did something that looked like madness against the most powerful navy on earth. On the 18th of June, 1812, the United States declared war on Great Britain. This is the act of Congress that began it. And the Royal Navy answered in the only way a great sea power could. It sealed the American coast, a blockade that stretched, in time, from Maine all the way to Georgia. Under British law, spelled out in documents like this one, any American ship that dared to sail was now a prize to be captured and sold. So, the ships stayed in port, their sails furled, and slowly rotted at the wharves. Nothing came in, nothing went out. The numbers alone tell the story. American trade, everything the country bought and sold across the sea, collapsed from around $114 million to somewhere near 20. The ocean, which for 2 centuries had been America's great highway to the world, had become a wall. The war for that wall was fought ship against ship. America had almost no navy to speak of, a handful of frigates against the fleet that had beaten Napoleon. Every single fight was a gamble against impossible odds. And yet, again and again, the small American navy stunned the world. Frigates dueled at pistol range until the decks ran with blood. This is the Shannon and the Chesapeake, 1813. A battle so ferocious it was decided in 15 minutes and gave the American Navy its immortal cry, "Don't give up the ship." Ships burned in the dark, crews fought by the light of their own cannon, masts falling around them, the sea itself lit orange. For a country fighting for its survival, these were not distant news. They were the difference between a nation and a colony. The fighting spread onto the lakes, where whole fleets were built from raw timber in a matter of weeks. Forests turned into warships. On these inland waters, American squadrons won some of the most important victories of the entire war. And it reached deep into the interior, down the great rivers, where flotillas of gunboats fought in the dark and armies gathered in the wilderness. Flags were taken and lost. Whole regiments surrendered their colors. The war swung back and forth with no end in sight, and then came the blow that should have broken the country entirely. In August of 1814, British troops marched into Washington, the capital of the United States, and put it to the torch. They burned the Capitol itself. This is what was left of it. The seat of the government, gutted, its walls open to the rain. The president fled. The city smoldered. It was the lowest, darkest hour of the war, and to much of the world it looked like the end of the American experiment. The country was fighting on every front, at sea, on the lakes, on the frontier, simply to go on existing. But behind that wall of British ships, something was happening that no general had planned and no treaty would ever record. A country cut off from the world had to make, for itself, every single thing the world used to send it. Cloth, iron, glass, tools, guns. The blockade that was built to strangle America was doing the one thing no law and no fiery speech had ever managed to do. It was forcing her, at last, to build. And into that moment stepped a Boston merchant named Francis Cabot Lowell. A few years earlier, in poor health, he had traveled through England and toured its great textile mills as a polite, curious visitor. What his hosts did not know was that Lowell had a rare and photographic memory, and that he was studying their machines with the eyes of a spy. He carried the most important machine of the age, the power loom, home inside his head, just as Slater had carried the spinning frame a generation before. And with a gifted mechanic named Paul Moody and merchant partners like Nathan Appleton, he set out to rebuild it on American ground. Then Lowell did something the English themselves had never quite done. Instead of scattering the work across many small shops, he gathered every step of it under a single roof. The raw cotton would come in one door. The spinning, the weaving, the finishing, all of it would happen in one building, driven by one great water wheel in one continuous flow. The men who built it were merchants and gentlemen, not mechanics. Men like Kirkboot, who would run the mills, and Nathan Appleton, who put up the money. Together, they were betting an immense fortune that America could finally make its own cloth. In 1814, at Waltham, Massachusetts, the Boston Manufacturing Company opened the first fully integrated textile factory in the world. Raw cotton went in one end. Finished cloth came out the other, and this time there was no ocean in between. It worked, beyond anything the partners had dared to hope, and the machines, roaring all day long, needed hands to tend them, so the mills did something startling for their time. They did not hire men. They hired women. Young women came in from the farms of New England by the thousands to earn their own wages and live together in company boarding houses. History remembers them as the mill girls. Most were between 15 and 30. Many were saving to send a brother to school, or simply to have, for once, money that was theirs. The work was relentless. 12, 13, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, in rooms so loud that the women learned to read each other's lips over the thunder of the looms, in air thick with cotton dust and the smell of machine oil. But at the end of the week, there was a wage, a real wage, paid into their own hands. For a great many of these women, it was the first money they had ever earned that did not belong to a father or a husband, and that simple fact would change more than anyone expected. Waltham succeeded so completely that a single mill could no longer hold the ambition behind it, so Lowell's partners looked for water, a great deal of water, and found it where the Merrimack River dropped over a set of falls on a stretch of quiet farmland north of Boston. There, beginning in the 1820s, they built something the world had never seen before, a city planned from nothing, on purpose to manufacture. They named it Lowell, after Francis Cabot Lowell, who had died young and never lived to see it. They dug canals to carry the river's power to each mill in turn. They laid out streets and boarding houses and counting rooms, and within a single generation, Lowell grew from empty fields into one of the largest industrial centers in the entire United States. Every street, every canal, every brick was laid out around one thing, the machine, and the river that turned it. Mill after mill rose along the water, the Merrimack, the Boot, the Hamilton, the Massachusetts, their long brick walls and crowded chimneys turning a river valley into an engine. Great brick fortresses of industry, each one larger than almost any building the founding generation had ever imagined, and each one humming day and night with the work of thousands. A clock stood over the mill gate, and its bell rang out the hours, waking the town, opening the gates, closing them again. It was the sound of a new kind of life, no longer measured by the sun and the seasons, but by the shift and the bell. A whole city of brick and water and iron, where one lifetime before there had been nothing but a farm and a waterfall. And inside, the roar. Hundreds of power looms under a single roof, their shuttles flying back and forth, a sound like a storm that never stopped. This was the thing the Blockade had built, not a single clever machine, but rooms full of them, and towns full of those rooms. Aisle after aisle of iron and thread, tended by women who a few years before had never seen a machine larger than a spinning wheel. The cloth came off the looms by the mile. American cloth spun and woven on American ground, no longer waiting on any ship from any empire. But the mill girls did far more than tend the looms. In the evenings in the boarding houses they read and debated and wrote. They founded their own literary magazine, pages of essays and poems and stories written by working women in the few free hours between their shifts. It astonished the visitors who came from Europe expecting to find only the grime of a factory town. And when the owners cut their wages, the mill girls did something almost unheard of for women of their time. They walked out. One of them, remembering a strike she joined as a young woman, wrote that it was the first time in her life she felt that a working woman's voice could actually matter. The The model spread far beyond Lowell. Up and down the rivers of New England, new mill towns rose on the same pattern. Dams, canals, brick mills, boarding houses, each one another piece of an industrial nation assembling itself almost overnight. And in 1816, the country made its choice official. When the war ended and cheap British cloth came flooding back to bury these young mills, Congress passed the first protective tariff in American history. A wall of law raised, this time on purpose, to guard the industry the blockade had accidentally created. Even Thomas Jefferson, who had spent his life dreaming of a simple republic of independent farmers, changed his mind. Manufactures, he wrote in that same year, are now as necessary to our independence as they are to our comfort. The man who had feared factories now admitted the country could not be free without them. The war that Britain had fought to keep America weak and dependent had handed her, instead, the one thing she had always lacked, an industry of her own. The blockade, built to close a country in, had walled her off from the world just long enough for her to grow strong. These are the faces and the streets from the far end of that story. Ordinary people in an ordinary mill town at the beginning of the age that would remake the world. They were here. And out of a country that had been cut off from the entire world, they built the machine age that the world itself would one day follow. They were here. If their story stayed with you, subscribe to Lost and Found Archives and help keep them from being forgotten. New faces from before living memory.